Hello and welcome to the show. Now, if you want to get around a racetrack as fast as possible, your best bet is with a Formula 1 car. Certainly the current generation of cars, the one we have to play around with in Forza 7, are ridiculously fast. In fact, they are so fast in this game that in some circuits the replay cameras have a really damn tough job of keeping up with them. Hell, I have a tough job trying to keep the things under control with the controller. They're not the easiest to drive because there's just so much grip going on with these. They change direction so incredibly quickly. However, there is an interesting setting. When you are in the Forza 7 multiplayer lobbies, you can give cars a power handicap, and when you stick that up to maximum, these cars can have just 200 horsepower. Now, before I continue, I'm going to give a brief pause, a couple of seconds. Get the McLaren Honda jokes out of your system. Okay? I think we're good. Are we done with that portion of the video? Can we get all the McLaren Honda jokes out of the way now before we move on? Yeah, we can limit the power of these cars quite massively, which will mean they are considerably slower down the straights. But when it comes to the corners, they will still have all of the Formula 1 attributes. You see, when you're driving a normal car that has around 200 horsepower, hell, take this Mazda MX-5 Super 20, this in fact has more power than the restricted Formula 1 cars that we were going to use, and it would be faster in a straight line. The restricted Formula 1 cars do about 120-ish miles an hour down the straights. The Mazda will go quicker. The Mazda will also set off faster. It'll accelerate to 60 quicker than the F1 cars. But when it gets to the corners, it's a completely different story because, well, the Formula 1 car still handles like a Formula 1 car. It's still got those humongous tyres. It's still got incredible brakes and a huge amount of downforce. Now, that downforce works against it when it comes to the straight because the car is lacking so much in terms of power and the downforce is so extreme. The car really struggles to get off the line even with the amount of resistances going on inside the vehicle. But when it gets to a corner, whereas the Mazda here is, I say slipping and sliding its way around, it is in comparison to the Formula 1 car. Now that is to be expected, but it makes for an interesting challenge. It makes driving the low-powered Formula 1 cars very different to just the normal low-powered, the slower car racing. You know, we love racing the slower cars here at FailRace. Some of the best races we've had are with cars that don't have a huge amount of power, but nothing will quite drive like a restricted Formula 1 car because it will have none of the go, but will carry all of the speed around the corners. It isn't the most spectacular sight when the cars go off the line, I'll be honest here. It's not. There is a lot of noise and not a lot of movement. It looks like somebody's got the camera stuck in slow-mo. However, no, that is just how slow these cars get going. They really struggle. They really struggle to get off the line. However, we come up towards turn 1 here on the opening lap. You don't need to brake. There's not a single bit of braking going on. There's a lot of cars going too wide around this first corner. It is very difficult at times to judge how much steering is needed because they will change direction at such absurdo rates. It's quite easy to end up slightly putting a bit too much steering and bouncing off the car that is on the inside. On the most part, though, we made our way through the opening corners okay as we headed further around the lap. One thing that became immediately apparent, overtaking, while a bit easier, perhaps, than in, well, sort of full-speed Formula 1 cars, the difficulty comes in that you can't afford to lose momentum with these cars because there is so little in the way of power because they struggle so much in terms of acceleration. You try and make an overtake, you better make that overtake because if you don't, you are both going to lose heaps of time. If you get stuck going too wide through multiple corners, you lose so much time to the cars around you. These guys were busy fighting their way into that final corner. The vehicle, or the two vehicles behind them, caught up so much because they were side by side on the way. And now the cars behind didn't actually have anywhere to go and couldn't make the most of their run onto the start-finish straight. However, it is yeah, so you've got to be so wary of. You've got to be really thinking about every overtake, every pass that you go for. You can't afford to run wide out onto the grass. The car that the cameras follow at the moment just about gets away with it. You touch the grass, you lose momentum. And in a position like this, you could lose 2 places just from putting your wheel on the grass. In the end, he has to settle for losing 1, but could have been an awful, awful lot worse for him as we feed our way through the chicanes. So let's throw back of the field. It is another prime example. The final corner here is flat out in these cars. It's absolutely flat out. However, it's not necessarily flat out if you're going too wide. And again, we see the cost of time running side by side into that corner means the vehicle that we're following here made up 2 places. 2 places just by being able to take his optimum racing. Like, you see the gap that the vehicle is now at the back of the group has lost. The amount of time he has lost coming on to that particular straight. I apologise for no liveries at Forza 7. It now does seem to work with replays having liveries. It didn't at the time that this was made. I was up briefly into a 2nd place. Unfortunately for me, it wouldn't last too long. I got past, although another vehicle had a better run, and I had to give him space on the inside, and in giving him space, I lost my momentum all the way down the hill. I just couldn't get the car accelerating away. I was trying to use as much of the road as I could, and in doing so, vehicles with a lot more momentum behind were keen to come soaring past. I hadn't realised just how much momentum I'd lost, and yeah, wasn't quite paying attention to where the other... I wasn't quite paying attention to where the other vehicles were. Wasn't realising just how fast they were catching. So yeah, I almost lost 3 places in all of that, continuing to fight my way, determined not to lose the next one. And if you can be smooth enough with the steering, you can make some spectacular passes work. Like the amount of speed that is lost just by turning the wheels, like the almost friction that occurs when you turn the wheels in these cars is often enough to slow them down for a lot of corners. But for some of these faster turns, if you can just limit that, if you can just limit the amount you turn the wheels as much as possible, then you can get that little bit more speed. And you can see there are a couple of good corners, the sort of gap that I could pull on the vehicles behind. Again, another group of cars fighting into this final corner. It's such an important turn to get right here at Mugello, because you immediately go on to an incredibly, incredibly long straight, and any little mistake you make at the corner punishes you all the way down the straight. So the vehicle that we're following here has the best run out of that final corner, although then does get a little bit stuck outside. As I get stuck outside of the slipstream, the cars ahead then do go too wide, and they both kind of end up getting evened out in terms of having slipstream down towards the first corner. The green helmeted vehicle is having to try and go the long way round at turn 1. We did see a few cars off in the grass. He gets away with it on this time around, although there's then also not a huge amount of places to go when the 2 vehicles up ahead are fighting side by side. And again, a little bit out of position through that first chicane and having to try and get the overtake done is now being fought with on the outside towards the next chicane. Car thinks better of it. If you do have to grab the brakes through some of these corners, again, you can lose stacks of time. It really tests your track usage, almost. You've got to use every single millimetre of the circuit, every single bit of road that you can. Not too much, because as I said, you put a wheel on the grass, you're done for, but you've really got to maximise the amount of road. It takes a while to get used to as well, because you're coming up towards corners and you are, you know, we've all driven slower race cars, you're used to what the expected braking zones are, and with these, it's just not the case. I think you could probably get around a lap here without actually going on the brakes at all. With just lifting off the throttle and turning in and downshifting, you can get around a lap of this circuit competitively in this group. I'm pretty sure that's what I was doing on most of the laps. Sometimes, of course, you have to just ever so slightly grab the brake because of the cars around you, but yeah, on your own, you could probably go without touching the brakes on the car. Between the friction of the front wheels turning for a corner and the drag on the vehicle, yeah, it would work. This was the big fight over second place that raged for the latter part of the race. Unfortunately, a little bit of a lag bump would affect a couple of the leaders. Yeah, I had a good run coming out of the chicane, looking for any opportunity that I might have. Was trying to go around the outside, actually got a big slide. I think I had a wheel on the curb on the way in. Got a big wiggle from the car. Ended up asking a little bit too much. It was the final lap, had to give it a go. But yeah, in the end, a little bit too upset on the way into the corner, ran out of road. And that was me in trouble because I've lost all of that momentum. Now, thankfully, the cars behind weren't close enough to get past. But if I'd done that sort of mistake a couple of laps earlier, it's very easy to lose a large amount of time. For the leader, a little bit more of a lonely race at the front here. Having got to the lead, as I said, there was a little bit of a lag bump, unfortunately, that kind of stymied any big fight at the front. But when you're running around in clean air on your own, much easier to go quickly. We were busy fighting over second place. We lose so much time that, yeah, you just can't, you can't do anything about catching the vehicle ahead. So, relatively straightforward race for the leader. We then went to the Hockenheim short circuit, a much more technical track for the vehicles to have to deal with. Again, it's such an anticlimactic start. It looks completely wrong, and then you have the cars going through what is turn 1, and then it kind of looks a little bit better. it's a weird thing. I can't know if it's a weirder thing to drive or a weirder thing for me to watch the replays back. Because I think driving is slightly less weird. In all honesty, I think driving the vehicles is slightly less bizarre. It's not spectacular setting off whatsoever. Amazingly, everyone did a very good job of getting through the opening corners here. As I said, well, yeah, these things have got huge amounts of grip, and you know, while we are only having to brake a little bit around here, it is very easy to bump into cars unintentionally because of the speed at which the vehicle will change direction. Unfortunately, at the hairpin, a couple of cars will get connected, front wing kind of locked to rear wheel of someone's car. We see that crash fairly regularly on Forza. Not much that you can do once the two cars have got a little bit stuck together. I, with a random grid, had been dumped at the very back. One thing that would become immediately apparent, it's difficult to make your way through the field. It doesn't really matter how fast you are in terms of lap time, but it is very difficult to try and make your way up through the order because you lose so much time fighting cars. Side by side through corners will cost you even more time in these than you would perhaps in a normal vehicle, because they're so reliant on momentum. I managed to make up a couple of positions around these sort of final few corners. Turn 1, easily flat out in the vehicles. You've got to be a little bit aware that you don't turn in too much and clobber the horrible curb on the inside. Now, the biggest braking zone would be into this turn 2. I'll make up a third position within about 5 corners. Yeah, it's the biggest braking zone on the track, and when I say that, I literally mean you tap the brakes and then you turn in. It is easy to make a mistake down there, as we would find more and more in this race, but yeah, that's where you're going to kind of get outbraking manoeuvres. It's really how brave dare you be at throwing the car into the corner. Also into this particular hairpin as well, a little bit of braking was needed, but it was so easy to over-brake. So easy to slow the car down excessively without really realising, because it's only a fraction of a second on the brakes too long and these things will almost stop. Because you're not going that fast in a straight line anyway, and the brakes are so ridiculously good. At the front of the race, the leader wasn't quite running away with it as easily. However, second made a mistake, was slow coming out of the hairpin, and as soon as you've lost that momentum, you are in trouble. Not only have you, well, struggling for speed up towards the next corner, but then you're going side by side around a corner, and that's not what you want to be doing as they head towards turn 1. Normally a scary place to be on the outside, a bit better in cars that have this much grip. It's a little bit easier going too wide through turn 1. It's a great pass, actually, to get around the outside of that corner. Held the momentum all the way down to that second corner, and that would see a change for position. But yeah, unlike Magellan, the leaders hadn't quite run away as far. A little bit further back, we would end up sort of splitting off into pairs. There were quite a few of these little pairings that were fighting for position, and of course, both as we fall, costing ourselves huge amounts of time, so we keep falling back from cars that are running around on their own. But we were having our own fun little battles. Turn 2 would claim a number of victims. In fact, our battle here would change place almost every lap. In fact, sometimes 2 or 3 times per lap. It was the vehicle ahead of me that ran wide through the second corner, would allow me to get the position back, but I'd make mistakes at that particular corner, losing time. I'm under much pressure as we come around towards the hairpin. Again, vehicle's getting a little bit connected with the sort of wings on wheels. I was a bit slow out of that hairpin, get a helpful nudge to get my vehicle going. These are quite wide cars, especially for a track like this. So, yeah, sometimes if you make a little mistake, the vehicle behind doesn't have anywhere to go. Turn 2 was even catching up the leaders, with first place out very wide. Second place tries to hold it on the track a little bit better and ends up with going for a spin, even with the cars having just 200 horsepower. Spins were surprisingly, well, I say surprisingly easy. Have a wheel across the grass, trying to put some power down. Yeah, that could could get you in trouble, and they don't really have the greatest of turning circles. A three-point turn is not the easiest to do on the grass out there with the car. Unfortunately, that was right towards the very end of the race, so the leader would have an easier final lap, although I think just about everybody at some point went for an exploration at turn 2. Not everyone quite going for a full spin, but yeah, trying to figure out just where you could get away with the braking in all of that would lead to a few cars going off. By the end of it, yeah, fairly sizable margin of victory for our leader. Third place would be the closest battle towards the finish line, heading up towards the hairpin. I don't think we saw anybody make it all the way around the outside of the hairpin there. It's quite a long way to go if you end up losing a bit of momentum around there. Still trying to find ways around the outside into these final corners, ducks underneath, but you take that really tight line and you run the risk of not quite having that acceleration, that momentum out of the turn, and yeah, in the end couldn't find a way past. Through everything that they could at finding a way past, but not quite. So there we go. 200 horsepower Formula 1 cars, a very weird experience to go racing with. They are very much like nothing else you will have ever driven. In some ways, they drive quite a lot like remote control cars or very, very fast go-karts. That sort of the little amount of braking that you need to do is literally flat out through almost every corner, and sometimes a tap on the brakes to get them into the tighter sections. Makes it a very strange thing to drive, and overtaking is a very long, thought-out process. You've got to really make sure that you've got sort of a possibility to get an overtake done, because you lose so much time running side by side. It becomes quite a tactical decision, especially when you're in a bigger group of cars. I highly recommend you have a go with it, though, as you get some really, really interesting racing. It can get a little bit lonely for some cars if you end up outside of battles or ahead of groups of vehicles when you're running on your own and be considerably faster than cars going side by side, but when you are in the midst of battles, it is really, really rather entertaining fun. That, though, is going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.